Warning: some contents may be disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised. To start, let me explain myself. I'm 5'7", 113 pounds, and I was 16 at the time of the encounter. And I'm a multi-sport athlete: track, handball, volleyball, basketball, and hockey. And I also have insomnia. This all happened around 2 a.m. on August 10th of 2019. I had been over to my best friend's place because she had just returned home from a vacation and she had birthday presents for me, hoodies and gummies if you're curious. I had spent almost an hour there already and I wanted to head back home soon because honestly, my town is scary at night. Drug dealers, rapists, and murderers. You know the deal. So I waved goodbye to my best friend and I started walking down her street. I guess a party had just let up because behind me at the end of the road, about 20 or 30 yards from where I was standing, there were a couple of men walking across the crosswalk. They were both pretty tall. I'm guessing between 5'11" and 6'3". The two seemed harmless at first when I looked in their direction, but soon they came to a stop. They were both looking at me, and at this point, I felt really uncomfortable, so I just kept walking. That's when I overheard what one of them said. "Hey, that's a girl." At this point, I whipped my head around. They were starting to walk in my direction now, and one of the two men had moved over towards the sidewalk where there was no light. I knew at this point that something wasn't right, and I began to pick up my pace. They were still getting closer. I didn't know where the second guy was, but when I looked back, the first guy was still following me down the middle of the road. I think that they were planning to cut me off and try to trap me between the two of them. The minute that I was about 13 yards from the T intersection, I started to run, and that's when the yelling started. "Oh great, now she's running!" I hooked a sharp right and then a left, and I could still hear them behind me. And at this point, all I knew was that I couldn't stop moving. I had to lose them somehow. I was coming up to an apartment building with a small parking lot behind it. There were no lights, and I made the split-second decision to veer off into the parking lot, and I squeezed myself under one of the cars. I don't know how long I waited there. It could have been a minute, but it felt like a lifetime. And I watched the two men run past. They didn't bother to check under the cars, which was definitely in my favor. The minute that I felt that I was safe, I backtracked and I took a different route back to my home. I was too scared to take the main route in the fear that I would have bumped into them. I know, what I'm about to say is stupid, but I didn't go to the police. I wouldn't have been able to give a proper description of the men because I hadn't seen their faces. If there's anything I learned from my experience, it's that no matter who you are, you need to be extremely careful. You can think that part of the town or city that you live in is safe, but that really isn't the case. There is no protective barrier to keep out people with bad intentions. Please, whatever you do, watch your surroundings as if your life depends on it. If I had been listening to my music and not paying attention, I hate to think what could have happened to me. I hope that no one else has to experience the fear that I did. It was almost like prey being chased by predators. And to the men who followed me, let's never meet again. This story happens the end of last year. For context, I'm a 16-year-old female, and what you might guess from the story, I don't live in the best part of my town. Well, on to the story. I had met this guy while playing Overwatch. We'll call him Dave. Dave and I got along pretty well, so we exchanged our Snapchats, and clueless me left my location on. So, for a few weeks, we were just playing video games and staying up late texting on Snapchat. After a few months of this routine, things started to get strange. Dave would send me photos of street signs, starting with a street about a mile away from my house. I was confused, and I still hadn't thought to turn off my location, and I didn't think about it. But the next day, he sent a photo of a street sign that was closer. It went on like this for a while, until he sent a photo of the street a block away from my house. I started to become concerned, but still, I left my location on. A few days later, I got a series of photos. It was dark and late, and the photos were of sidewalks getting closer and closer to my house. Until there was a photo of my house. I ran down the stairs and I looked out the window, but I didn't see anyone. I hid in the bathroom because the last thing I wanted was a photo of me through the window. Nothing happened after this, other than one of those devil emojis were sent, and then I was blocked. If some of you are curious why I didn't tell anyone, is if you have Snapchat, you know that the messages are only open for a certain amount of time. I personally don't know how to do it, but I know that you can change the time that it will show, and he set it to like a minute after opened. And I didn't want him to know that I was screenshotting the conversations. So Dave, let's not meet. This happened a few summers ago. My friends and I threw a going-away party for our friend that is going to migrate to Canada. We went to this island, and it was during their non-peak season, so that means that we were the only guests there. We arrived at the island just around after lunchtime. A few kilometers away from the resort, there's this small village just near the port. When we arrived to the said port, the resort service vehicle was not there. They alerted us that they were going to be a little late because their vehicle broke down. So, we decided to stop by this small store and bought some other necessities that we forgot to buy in the mainland. There was this group of men around their late 20s that were catcalling us. Our group consists of 5 girls and 4 boys, and one came up to me and asked for my number. I refused politely, and one guy friend ushered me away from him. And thank heavens, our service arrived, but he was still staring at me. And to be honest, it really creeped me out. When we arrived at the resort, it had cottages that were on stilts. You have to climb up a bamboo ladder to get into the room. It was also made from bamboo, just your typical hut. Even the floors were made from bamboo, and the bathroom is separated from the huts and is for common use. We partied, and I got tipsy fast because I'm a lightweight. I excused myself from the group and I climbed up the cottage to change into my swimwear. My friends really wanted to go island hopping. I was also planning to take a swim in the beach and island hop, just to lessen the buzz, you know. But I was not able to change. Since the room just started spinning, I decided to just snap it out. I told my friends to just go without me. It was a long debate because they don't want to leave me all alone, but I insisted that they should go. And after a few beggings, they went on the island hopping without me. When I woke up, it was already around twilight. The resort was quiet. It was a bit dim inside the room. The resort hadn't turned on the lights since the electricity only runs via solar and generator. They only turn on the generators around 7 p.m. I can already feel the hangover, so I used my phone's flashlight to help me see. But then I noticed that the door was slightly ajar. I was sure that it was closed when my friends left. When I was about to close it, the head of the guy from earlier popped out and he gave me that creepy smile and was still asking for my number. I told him to get out, but he was begging for my number. He even used his foot to stop the door from closing. I screamed and he kept on saying in our language, which translates to, "Come on, ma'am, let's fuck." And I kept on screaming and I called my friends. And what he said made me shiver. He said that my friends hadn't arrived yet. He was standing there for hours and he was watching us. I kept on screaming for the caretakers of the island and I screamed for help. And finally, I saw the beams of the flashlight running towards us. He quickly left and he ran towards the forest just behind the hut. I was shaking to the point that I was not able to stand up. My friends arrived and the caretakers told my friends about what happened. They asked for the help of the caretakers and the local chief of the island, and they went on a manhunt to look for the guy. Sadly, he was not seen. We left the same night and just transferred to another island with a much private resort. Three years ago, I was living with my then boyfriend in a one-bedroom apartment in a little mountain town. It was a half-basement unit, so the bottom of all our windows were level with the ground outside. It was also an older apartment, and not all the windows could fully lock. One day, my boyfriend comes home from work while I'm laying on the sofa and immediately runs up to the window near me and looks out of it frantically. He then goes out to look at every other window in the house, and then walks around the outside looking in the windows. When he comes back from this confusing exploit, I ask him what the hell is going on and why he's being a spaz. "I think I just walked up on a dude looking in the window at you. He took off as I walked up," he tells me. This was naturally very unsettling, but after discussing it and considering the time of day, it was about 2 p.m. and the number of people out and about around the complex at that time, we came to the conclusion that it was just a curious neighbor or someone passing by happening to glance in. And with that, we forgot about it. If only that was the end. For the next couple of months, odd stuff happened here and there. Someone would knock on the door occasionally, then when I went to answer, no one was there. I'd find things in my apartment that I wasn't familiar with, or things like clothing items would vanish. And I didn't really think twice about any of it, until one night. My boyfriend and I were arguing around 1 or 2 in the morning, and we were being a little loud. We were standing in the kitchen face to face. His back was to an open window with the blinds up halfway, and I was facing it. Amidst our arguing, I glanced behind him at the window, thinking that I saw the reflection of my face in it. But the window was open, and it wasn't my face. There was a man with his face pressed almost against the window screen, watching us. Given the fact that we were arguing and it was late, I thought for a moment that it might have been a concerned neighbor walking up to the window to speak to us. A main walkway for the complex was right on the other side of the window, so I spoke to him. "Hello? Can I help you?" I asked a little aggressively, thinking a neighbor was intruding on our privacy. He responded to this by staring, unwavering and cold, right at me. His face did not change expression. He did not blink or move. He just looked right at me in a way that I have never been looked at before or since. In this instant, I also realized that because of the window being level with the ground, the only way this man's face could be where it was if he was laying on the ground outside the apartment or crouched and contorted to look into the window. My heart sank. I buried my face in my boyfriend's chest and I closed my eyes in fear. My boyfriend up to this point thought that I was messing with him. When I buried my face in his chest, only then did he say, "Is there really someone at the window?" I whispered yes to him. He felt my fear and took a moment before he turned around, but by the time he did, the man was gone. It was at this point that I started to think about all the little odd occurrences that I had been experiencing, and I assumed the worst. I filed a police report with his description, and my brother loaded my apartment up with weapons to protect me, or at least inform this Peeping Tom that I was armed. After that night, myself, my boyfriend, and my brother were on high alert. There were a couple times when my brother came over that he saw a sketchy dude hanging around, and even one time, he saw him at my window. He tried to follow him discreetly, but the guy took off running as soon as my brother stepped in his direction. The last night that I had an experience with this man, I was sitting home alone on my sofa. My boyfriend was at work at a restaurant about 2 blocks away. He had picked me up from work an hour earlier. We had sat on the sofa together a little while when we got home. Then he kissed me and left for work, locking the door behind him. After he left, I continued to sit on the couch and on Reddit for a while in silence. After about an hour of me sitting there in silence, I hear a door creak open. It was a small apartment, so to see the bedroom and bathroom doors from the couch, all I had to do was lean a little to the left. I assume it was one of my cats coming out of my bedroom, so you can imagine my shock when I lean over and see the door that's opening is the door to the water heater or closet or small storage space. I look to my right and I see both my cats sleeping soundly at the other end of the couch. I look back to the door and it's still creaking open very slowly. It opens enough for me to see it. A set of fingers wrapped around the door, easing the door ever so gently to open it as quietly as possible. That was gonna be a no for me. I ran my ass barefooted out of the door and into the snow and down the street to my boyfriend's work. I called the cops. When everyone was back to check out the apartment, he was, of course, gone. After that, my boyfriend and I packed our shit and then went to stay with my parents, and 6 months later, moved 1,000 miles away from that town, and that was the end of it. I initially found this sub around that time as I was trying to find other stories similar to mine or people to talk to who had experienced something like I did. I had intended to write my story here eventually, and I figured after this week's events that I had to. I live 1,000 miles away from where all of this happened, so a part of me thinks that there's no way that this person could have found me. But last week, I heard a knock on the front door of my apartment. I was expecting a package, so I figured that it was a delivery driver and I didn't answer, that I just go and get the package later. Then they knocked again, and then again, and the third one made me feel uneasy, so I waited a good 20 minutes to check the door. And when I did, there was no package, no note, no nothing. Someone was just knocking. Although it made me uneasy, I didn't initially think back to my stressful experience in my last town. Then 2 days ago, I went out to get groceries. I have a little patio and I go out there in the mornings to just chill or check on plants a lot, and I've been known to leave it unlocked in the day on accident. I never thought of it as a huge deal until I came home from the store 2 days ago and the deadbolt to my apartment was locked. The deadbolt can only be locked from the inside of the apartment, period. I assumed someone robbed me because I dumbly left my patio unlocked. I called my sister, I called my current new boyfriend, and I waited for people to be with me. And I went into my apartment through the sliding glass patio door. Nothing was out of place. Nothing of value was taken. And at this point, my heart sank. Nothing was touched. Nothing stolen. Someone was inside my apartment just because they wanted to be inside of my apartment. I told my boyfriend about my stalker, and he is not taking this shit lightly like my past boyfriend. I filed a police report. We checked for recording devices and cameras, and he put Nest cameras up all over the place, and we are on high alert. I really truly hope that this is a coincidence, but if this man really followed me across multiple state lines, there is no one on this earth that I'm less interested in meeting. Hi, for the record, I'm a female. I'm turning 19 this year, and this story happened when I was 15. Oh, and also, I'm from France, which can explain my English mistakes if there is any. When I was a 15-year-old, I just got into junior year. I created my first Twitter account that I deleted because of this story. Some information. I didn't tell anyone my username, neither my family nor my friends, because I didn't have any. My profile picture was an avatar, so no pictures of me on the account, and as location, I said Paris because I have lived in the suburbs. I didn't have many followers, 20 or maybe 30, and I didn't follow that much people, so my timeline was not really interesting. One evening in October, someone sent me a quite strange direct message. It was a 200-follower account, and the message said, "Hi, my name is Rob. I just turned 17 and I wanted to know if you lived in..." He then mentions a certain place and then adds, "Because I will soon move in and I go to the town high school. I'm looking for friends." The town he mentioned was obviously the town that I lived in. I immediately thought that something was wrong because there was nowhere on my profile that said where I actually lived. But after some time thinking, I remembered of a tweet that I made weeks ago about buses, and I mentioned the city, so I told myself that he just looked it up and found my tweet. His age wasn't shocking because I'm 2 years ahead of my classmates. I was bored, and as he was polite, I answered him. I told him that I indeed lived in that area and I go to high school there. The discussion was natural, and we talked a lot that night, mainly about high school, about the food at the cafeteria, about the teachers, that kind of thing. But as it was getting very late, he tried to interpose some personal questions like, "Do you live far away from the school? Is it a house or in an apartment? Do you live with both your parents? There's 5 of you. You're not often home alone, right?" And I never answered because it was way too shady for me, and unfortunately, he didn't insist. Unfortunately, because if he did, then I would have probably blocked him. The next day, same thing. We talked a lot, and he was still asking personal questions to know me better. So I asked him some too, and he always answered with what seemed like honesty. I still didn't answer the questions about my house though, because he didn't need to know anything. It lasted 2 or 3 weeks, but it was enough for me to develop feelings for him. He was handsome, super kind, and it was everything I needed, because I have been bullied for years and even today. So I still developed strong feelings, but most importantly, blind trust in people who are friendly to me. In France, in October, we have a 2 weeks long vacation, and the day before back to school day, he finally told me that he was coming to my high school because he finally moved in with his mom, and he asked me a place to meet during the morning break. I was so happy and relieved to be able to meet him. I told him to join me in the hall. But when he understood that there would be people around, he said that he would prefer an isolated place because he was afraid that he would not recognize me and didn't want to spend the break looking for me. It was a good excuse for me, so I told him to meet me in the 3rd floor bathroom because we weren't allowed to stay there during the breaks and no one would disturb us. In my head, even though it was a little bit creepy, I still was in the school, so nothing could happen to me. Next day, back to school day, I made myself pretty. I wore my best clothes and I counted down the minutes. And finally, when break time arrived, I ran to the bathroom and waited. And when he arrived, it was him. He was not a catfish. He looked quite like his profile picture. But I still noticed that he seemed a little bit older than he told me. I thought 20 years old instead of 17. We talked a lot, we got along well, and I was so pleased. And at the end of the break, he asked me to go to the fast food with him for lunch. I said no because I don't have any money, and I always refuse for people to pay for me. It's just my principle. He seemed disappointed, but offered to walk me home after classes. I explained that I have to take the bus, but that he could walk me to the bus stop. He looked disappointed again, but finally accepted. And that's exactly what happened, and it was so great that it quickly became some kind of routine. We met in the 3rd floor bathroom during morning break, and then he walked me to the bus stop after classes. Surprising fact, I never saw him in the hallways nor at the cafeteria, but I thought at that time that the building was huge and that there was over 1,500 students in here, so if our schedules didn't coincide, there was no way that we could meet each other. This little game lasted until December, so almost a month and a half. The 14th of December, a Thursday, I complained about how lonely I was going to be that evening because my dad was abroad for work, my brother was always at his friend's house, my little sister was on a school trip, and my mom had to work late that very night. Well, that was very reckless of me, but after weeks, I thought that I could really trust him. That evening, he walked me to the bus stop. We both waited and I got in the bus. I waved at him and put in my earphones, and I had 2 stops before my house. It was about 17:45 and in December, so it was already really dark outside, and as I got out the bus, I had a really bad feeling. There was that very uncomfortable sensation on my stomach, and I felt like being observed. I pressed pause on my music, but I kept my earphones on so that people thought that I couldn't hear anything. And that's probably what saved my life. I lived in a suburban neighborhood, very silent especially at night, with no visibility on the big road that the bus passed in. When I heard footsteps behind me, I understood that I was right. There was someone following me, and he was not well-intentioned. At least, I could hear that he was not accelerating, so he was not trying to catch me up, but I couldn't guess how long it would last. As quietly as possible, I tried to reach for my keys in my pocket and when I finally pulled them out, I ran as fast as I could. That was the best sprint of my life. I don't know how it worked, but I managed to open and close the door before he could reach me. I then deactivated my alarm, which, by the way, confirmed that I was home alone. And I took a look through the glass panel on the door. It is not a peephole, it is a whole window, so if someone wants to see what's happening inside, they can. Well, it was Rob, a few meters away, looking at me with a really creepy face. He followed me to my home, probably with a car, and he was clearly not here for chit-chat. I still don't know why I didn't call the police. I was totally paralyzed, and we both stared at each other for a minute. And when I took back control over my body, I ran in the kitchen to get a knife, and I got back to the door. He was there too, banging against the door, and I feared for a second that the glass would break, but it didn't happen. That moment, when I was pushing against the door, praying for it not to break while he was kicking harder and harder, it was the longest that I've ever experienced. After maybe 5 minutes, he stopped and got around the house, knocking against every shutter, and got back to the door. He looked very angry, but then my neighbor's car reached my house and Rob ran away, probably thinking that it was my mom coming home. On Twitter, Rob sent me 1,000 messages before I could block him. He then deleted his account, and I thought I was done with his story. But quickly after, some accounts which have just been created followed me. Their were all a series of numbers and the first letter of his name, and as soon as I blocked one, another one followed me. So I just chose to delete my account because I couldn't make it stop. It was too hard to endure because they were sending me dozens of insulting messages. Later, I talked to the people who were supposed to be Rob's classmates because I haven't met him again in days, but not a single one ever heard about a Rob. This guy was never a student in my high school. That is why I have never met him apart from our daily meetings, and that is probably why he seems so old. I never heard about him anymore, and I'm still asking myself what he wanted and what could have happened that night. So Rob, let's never meet again. I was 22, and I was living on my own for the first time when this happened. It was around the mid-90s. I had just gotten off from work around 11 p.m. to reach my apartment building. I could either walk on the sidewalk, it was lit with street lamps, decently trafficked, or cut across this communal garden, which was pitch black and set back from the street. I saved about 1 whole minute of walking time by cutting through the communal garden, but being young and stupid, a lot of times I took the shortcut. Well, that night, I got that weird feeling not to take the shortcut. I kept to the sidewalk, but there's no one else around. When I got past the garden, all of a sudden, this large man pops up from its exit path. There was no way he could have been in front of me or just behind me as I was walking. I would have noticed him. The only logical explanation was he had been hiding in the pitch-black garden. Was it a drunk who had been sleeping it off? No. My body was screaming at me to get the hell out of there. I began walking faster. My dad had taught me to always carry my keys in my fist, with a key pointed out in case that I needed to punch someone. So I had that. But I'm 5'4" and probably weigh 110 pounds. And this guy was tall and big. My only chance was to outpace him. I'm speed walking at this point, and I feel him matching my pace, getting closer. He's breathing heavily, and I feel this angry energy coming off of him. But my apartment building is right there, so I put on a burst of speed, and when I reach the entrance, 2 people are leaving and hold the door for me and him. I don't know why I didn't tell them that I thought this guy was following me. My mind froze, and I was just trying to get inside of my apartment. Plus, I was still trying to rationalize it. Maybe he was visiting someone in the building. Maybe it was all just a coincidence, that I shouldn't be this paranoid. Besides, it took only a couple seconds for them to be out the door, and I had missed my chance. I'm climbing the stairs as fast as I can. It's a 3-story building, and I live on the 3rd floor. He's climbing the stairs too, still right behind me. I get to my floor, which has 4 apartments on the right side where I live, and 4 on the left. I pass by apartments 1 and 2, and he is still right behind me. I stop at apartment 3, where I live, and he stops in front of apartment 4, where I know that he doesn't live. He hasn't said anything, just breathing hard, and I think there's no way that I'm going to open my apartment door and have him push me inside and rape me, or worse. He also hasn't knocked on the door of apartment 4. Worth noting is that the apartments are U-shaped, with mine and my neighbor's door being very close together. So, I bang on my own apartment door as loud as I can, but I yell my neighbor's name. "Hey, Kevin, let me in!" This startles the guy, even more so when my own apartment door doesn't open, but Kevin's does. Kevin sees the guy standing right in front of his door and asks what he wants. The guy starts mumbling something about the wrong apartment, but I have my own door open fast that I am inside my place in a flash, and then locking the door behind me. I grab my cordless phone to call the police, but I hear Kevin through the door telling the guy that he needs to leave, and the guy does. Kevin knocks on my door and asks if I'm okay. I thank him, say that I am, but inside I am still frozen, adrenaline pumping, and scared. I thank him again and I tell him to have a good night, and I lock my door again. I have my phone in my hand, ready to call the police, but then I start trying to rationalize it again. What exactly happened? A guy followed me home, but then said he had the wrong apartment. Are the cops going to care about something minor like that? I try to calm myself down, but I am also berating myself. Why didn't I run the instant that I felt him following me? Why didn't I tell the people we passed when the front door opened that I thought that I was being chased? And worse, why didn't I tell Kevin the second he opened his door and saved me? He could have let me inside his apartment and we could have called the cops together. But because of my stupidity, everything felt so ambiguous and I was questioning myself. A couple of weeks later, I am visiting my grandparents and my grandfather is reading the paper. He tells me that a woman was raped in the apartment building across the street from mine. It was the same guy. He had multiple convictions for sexual assault and had recently been released on parole. Wendell was a panhandler near my college. I always gave him my change when I had extra. Usually, I keep a hard rule not to give money to individuals because I give it to known local charities instead, where I can be sure that the money is going to a specific cause. This one panhandler though, he always sang opera music, quite beautifully all things considered. And even though it was clear that he was begging for money due to poverty and homelessness, and not really busking for tips, I always thought that it was admirable that he was trying to perform a service in exchange for the money. I don't like carrying coins, so I just gave what I could, which wasn't much, barely $1 each time. I would occasionally strike up conversations with Wendell, even if I didn't have any money for him. He liked to make students laugh with funny impressions or jokes, and he was a bit older. I'm an undergrad, and he was probably 40s or 50s. So we'd mostly have quick chats about the news or the weather or whatever. Nothing really deep. Sometimes, he would randomly share something so intimate that I would feel obligated to reciprocate with something at least superficially personal. For example, he would blurt out that he almost went to college on a baseball scholarship, but then drugs ruined everything. And I would be like, "Oh, wow, I'm so sorry to hear that. I play volleyball, but not for a scholarship though. So I'll see you around, okay?" Once, Wendell called me over while I was walking with a professor, or my advisor, and I didn't want to be rude, so I just went over to say a quick hello, and I introduced my advisor. When we walked away, my advisor was pretty clearly horrified and asked why Wendell knew me by name. I explained our little friendship, and he said the homeless in the city weren't like the homeless in my smaller town back home. Well, I just figured that he was being an elitist, and I think he could tell that I hadn't taken him seriously, because after we dropped the subject and just before I left, he reiterated that I shouldn't forge friendships with the homeless population in the city or even give them money, because the chronically homeless, the ones on the streets enough that you could get to know them, tended to have a criminal or addictive history. I was surprised because my advisor is usually pretty progressive and compassionate, so I appealed to him with, "Wendell is a victim of a post-capitalist society," and all the other things that I'd learned in his very own classes. But he wasn't having any of it, basically saying however Wendell became chronically homeless, now he was, and I should act accordingly. So my professor strongly implored me not to continue even talking to Wendell at all. I just kind of shook my head thinking, "Okay, boomer." And if anything, I felt fortified by the warning. Like it was a confirmation that I was a radical doing the right thing, leading a new path, breaking down barriers, bettering the society. I got closer to Wendell and shared more about my life with him. But the very next time that I talked to Wendell, he was really irritable and distant, and I wasn't sure why, until he said, "So, your boyfriend, you two live together or what?" And I had no idea what he was talking about. I said, "What boyfriend?" And he said, "The guy I met from yesterday that you were walking down the street with." And I laughed, explaining that it wasn't my boyfriend, that it was just my academic advisor. Then all of a sudden, he wasn't irritable anymore. He was as chatty as he'd ever been. I probably should have taken that as a red flag, but I didn't think about Wendell much at all then. I only saw him once or twice a week, and only for a few minutes. It was around then that Wendell started bringing me gifts. I'd pass him, and he would have a flower for me, or a metal machine piece. I would never refuse, because I figured that it was a means of preserving his dignity when accepting money, like with his opera singing. One of my roommates did remark on the flower once. When I explained, she said that it was weird. I thought she was also just being an elitist, and I thought I was enlightened, bridging the class divide and superior to her neoliberal paranoia. I mean, come on, it's just a flower. My advisor clocked all this, so brought it up with me again a while later, saying he was worried that I was being manipulated. I tried to tell him about Wendell's opera singing and impressions and how he even almost went to college. But then I remembered the reason that he lost his baseball scholarship, and I stopped short. Looking at it through that lens kind of made me reconsider the whole thing. I thought about what my professor had said, sparing the details because we did talk for like half an hour, and I finally connected the dots that Wendell did have a history of drug use, and he did sometimes mention how a previous girlfriend was overreacting to something he'd done and had derailed his life besides the drugs. So I decided that maybe I should think about distancing myself a little. But very shortly after, the pandemic hit and classes went virtual. So to save on rent, I went home to my parents' house. It was still in the state, but not near campus at all. About 3 weeks into being home, I was watching a friend's Insta story when I heard Wendell singing opera in the background, and I thought, "Aw, I forgot all about him. Well, I hope he's doing alright." And that was that, and I kept watching different stories. Later that night, something about the story kind of stuck in my gut. It had popped into my mind a few times subconsciously, and I had ignored it, but it kept coming back, so I decided to go and watch it again. That's when I realized that my friend's video wasn't from our college town. It was from my much smaller hometown, which is nowhere near my college. That freaked me out a little bit, but I figured everyone moved around when the pandemic hit, and my town isn't that small, and it isn't that far from the college, so it was probably a coincidence. I really wanted to mention it to my parents, but they had always warned me against talking to homeless people, so I felt too embarrassed to explain the situation to them, especially since it was probably a coincidence, and I would sound so conceited if I were like, "He definitely followed me, because am I not so great that he's probably obsessed with me?" We have a type 1 diabetic in the family, so we took quarantining very seriously. I figured, I'll never see him anyways. I'm not going out anytime soon, so it really doesn't matter where he is. And nothing happened. Well, one thing. A girl from my high school, who also ended up at my college, called me, and in summary said, "Hi, this is going to sound really weird, but I feel like I should say something. I was downtown and a beggar asked me about you. Like, specifically you. He knew you were on the volleyball club. He knew your major. I didn't tell him anything, but I thought that you should know." I was pretty alarmed at first because how would he know that I know this girl? But once we talked, I learned she'd been wearing a sweatshirt from our college, so I thought about it and decided that he probably saw that sweatshirt and figured that she might know me from college since we were both from this town, and he was just trying to find out how I was doing. I thought that it was sweet, also a little weird, but he was a little weird, and that was part of his charm. I thanked her, but I told her not to worry about it. Besides, I wasn't in town much longer anyways. I decided to go live back near campus. It was impossible to get any of my coursework done with my whole family around all day. So, I went back to campus a while later, and I didn't think about Wendell at all. Until I saw him back on the same corner just a week after I returned to campus. Okay, even I knew at that time that something was wrong. I stopped giving him money, stopped talking to him, but I was so humiliated by how high and mighty I had been insisting that nothing was wrong and everyone else was being paranoid, that I decided not to tell anyone what I had noticed. I was already barely leaving my apartment, never going on campus, and his usual spot was right by campus. I felt bad about potentially hurting his feelings or reading too far into the situation, but I figured that he would get the message, and better safe than sorry. After finals, I decided to visit my brother. He's in a different state, and his roommate had moved home, so there was an extra bed. So I drove up to his place to celebrate the end of the year and just get away from it all. About the 9th day in, I was woken up earlier than usual to the sound of my brother talking at the door. I got up to see what was going on, because we weren't seeing anyone. We stayed totally quarantined, and his state was being hit hard. My brother was talking nicely to someone outside through a crack in the door, but when he turned, he looked royally pissed at me, and he turned back outside and said, "Hold on here," closed the door, despite the other guy protesting, but I couldn't hear what he said exactly. My brother immediately got in my face and whisper yelling said, "Mom and Dad are gonna kill you." I had no idea what he was talking about, but my first thought was the cops had come to arrest me for something. It was the only logical thought that I could generate first thing in the morning, and the only thing I could imagine being arrested for was my fake ID. So I was really in shock. But my brother was still going, and as best as I can remember, because I was panicked at this point, he was saying, "And I'm gonna kill you. That is so not cool. You didn't even ask? Well, I wouldn't have said yes anyways, but you didn't even think to ask." I realized that didn't align with being arrested, so finally I was like, "What are you talking about?" And he said, "You're dating a 40-year-old guy? Older? 45 maybe. Of all the people out there, I mean, Jesus, Dad's gonna kill you and then have a heart attack and die, which will kill Mom, and then you invited him to my house while we're supposed to be socially distanced? You two can go to a hotel because he isn't coming in here. I wasn't a dick to him out of respect for you, but if he doesn't leave now, that's gonna change." So I had no idea what he was talking about. None. I hadn't connected any of the pieces yet, because you've got to remember, Wendell was such a small part of my life until this point. I almost never saw him or thought about him, and my whole world had been turned upside down by a pandemic in the preceding few months. He was background noise, faint background noise, compared to all the other stuff that I had going on. So I just said the first thing that came to my mind. "Dude, I don't know why you're getting so mad at me. I don't have a boyfriend. I don't know what you're talking about. Someone's got the wrong house." My brother looked like he was ready to rip my face off. He said, "We're adults. Come on. Don't fucking lie to me. I'm not Mom and Dad. We can't deal with this if you're going to lie to my face." And I said that I wasn't lying, and I think he could tell from my expression and tone that I genuinely was serious. So now, he was as confused and irritated as I was, and he was like, "He didn't just vaguely say he was here for his girlfriend. He used your name. He rattled off a ton of very exact information. I think he said you, yeah. He said you guys had a fight or something, and that he was here to work things out." Now, I've been looking for a boyfriend for a long time, so I was half thinking, huh? Maybe dreams do come true. I might as well see who it is. But I was also starting to feel a bit sick in the pit of my stomach, because it would be one thing if this happened on campus or back home. But I had changed states. My brother moved to this state for school, and I don't know anyone here but him and his friends. So I finally did the obvious thing, and I looked through the peephole. I almost didn't recognize him at first because he had showered, shaved, and changed into clean clothes, and for the first time since I'd known him. But sure as shit, it was Wendell, standing on my brother's doorstep, hundreds of miles from his original corner. I was so scared that I couldn't speak. My heart was pounding like I was slipping under deep water with my legs tied. I just backed away from the door, and I sat down on the couch and tried to collect myself. My brother thought this was my way of affirming that there was really some secret older boyfriend who had just made himself known, so it took a minute for him to cut off his ranting and his dramatic, what will grandma think kind of stuff. Finally, he realized that I was tearing up and he sat down. He calmed down and apologized and said we'd figure it out, and I whispered, still out of breath, "No, you don't understand. He followed me here." My brother still didn't get it. "What? You didn't want him to come here? What was your fight about?" he asked, still thinking the guy was my boyfriend. I managed to repress my panic enough to explain the broad strokes to him, but I don't think he fully grasped how creepy it was in the moment, because he was like, "You're shitting me. That's hilarious. I'll take care of this." He went to the door and called from behind it, "Hey, I just checked. She's not here. She must have packed out this morning, and you should do the same. I'm taking the social distancing real serious." And then he winked at me. That's when, as my brother says when he tells this story, that it got real. Wendell said, "You're lying. I heard her in there. Tell her I'm sorry. I don't know why she's been avoiding me, but I got cleaned up for her, and I'll take her anywhere she wants to go. Tell her that. Tell her. And don't lie. I will know if you lie." That rubbed my brother the wrong way, and he said back, "Bro, you're not taking her anywhere. Now get off my deck before we have a problem." And Wendell sounded like he was walking away, but instead, he was going over to the window. When I saw him staring, he looked different than I had seen him before, even than a few seconds earlier when I glanced through the peephole. His clothes were clean, but they didn't fit our match. Eyes bugged out of his head, white stuff caked on the corners of his mouth, and I hadn't noticed at first. Shaking, just kind of disconnected from reality. He started banging on the window, shouting things like, "That's my girlfriend. You can't keep her in there. You little bitch ass. Let her out, you bitch ass. Let her out. I'm coming, baby. I'm coming." I couldn't tell if it was meant as a threat or a reassurance. I was so scared, but I was too scared to run or even move. I think my brother was almost as surprised by the sudden outburst. He was rolling up his sleeves like he was preparing to go out there, and I was trying to make my voice work to beg him not to. But I was so anxious, scared, embarrassed, and sad that I had missed all the signs leading up to this and all the opportunities to prevent it. That our friendship was never the wholesome thing that I thought it was. I had so many thoughts swirling in my head, fear being chief among them, and all I could do was scream. Not words, just screaming, and I covered my ears to drown the whole situation out. Before my brother could charge out of the door, Wendell punched through the window. Nothing actually happened when he punched through, and there was an eerie moment of silence where nobody moved, and I think even I stopped screaming. But when he pulled his hand back, all hell broke loose. A fair amount of blood started spurting out when he pulled his hand back through the glass. The things he was shouting started to make even less sense, along the lines of, Look what you did to me. This is a test. I told you that I couldn't be stopped, bitch ass." And the look in his eyes got even more distant. I think the sight of the blood, which always made my brother really squeamish, made him realize that this was real, and he finally yelled to me to call 911. While he leaned against the door, which Wendell was now repeatedly running into. I don't even remember making the call, but apparently I did, because within 10 minutes, the police arrested Wendell without resistance, and he kept trying to tell them that his girlfriend was trapped in the house and that he came all the way here to save me. My poor brother was even momentarily handcuffed and had to explain that he hadn't taken me hostage. It was probably one of the most haunting memories of the whole event, as they carted Wendell away for arrest and he started singing opera music. I've learned a lot of important common sense and life lessons from this saga. But most of all, Wendell, let's never meet again. Hi, first of all, I just want to say that English is my second language, so please forgive me if I make any mistakes. As a backstory, I'm from Malaysia, and this story happened in one of the international airports there. I came from East Malaysia, and I was a student at one point of the local university in Peninsular Malaysia. You can't travel to Peninsular Malaysia by land because it is separated by the South China Sea, so of course, the fastest way to get there is by flight, and for some reason, I really like taking the last flight of the night to get to my destination. I usually traveled alone, and I mostly keep to myself as I am an introvert, and I don't really like talking to strangers. And before that night, I haven't really encountered any problems with weird people, as the airport tended to be busy and I always stayed in an area filled with other people minding their own business, and in flight, I would just read or listen to some music. I also tended to just ignore the person sitting next to me. One night, my flight was unfortunately delayed. We were supposed to reach our destination close to midnight, but with the delay, we would reach the airport close to 2 a.m. I remember being frustrated because I know that it will be hard to get an Uber that late. I sighed and then just decided that I would spend the night at the airport and then grab an Uber the next morning to my university. No big deal really, I thought. People do this all the time, so I just relaxed into my seat. I forgot to mention that during the flight, I was supposed to sit in the middle, but when everyone was seated, I noticed an aisle that was empty, so I moved there. This was when I noticed the guy sitting on the window seat was acting kinda strange. He kept looking at me, and he was trying to get my attention, but I just ignored him because I was just tired and I don't really want to have a conversation with a stranger. I just closed my eyes and I pretended to sleep. I remember it was really cold inside and I was thinking about turning the AC off, but I didn't really want to move because then the guy would know that I'm awake and I will be forced to engage in a conversation with him. It was a 2.5-hour flight after all, and I don't want to have a conversation during the flight. Then suddenly, I feel a whole lot colder than before, and I opened my eyes just a little to figure out what was going on. Then I saw that the guy was actually adjusting both the AC from the top of his seat and also the AC from the middle seat to face me. I got very annoyed, but I'm not actually someone who likes to confront people for anything, so I just sucked it up and closed my eyes, even though now I was shivering, and just sort of hugged myself, and I just continued to ignore this guy. I honestly don't know what the guy was thinking doing that to me. I thought he was doing whatever he was doing and wouldn't bother me anymore after that, right? After all, I didn't respond to whatever the heck he was doing, even though I am suffering in silence now from the cold. However, when the air hostess started to distribute the prepaid meals to the passengers, and he noticed that I didn't have any meal when he got his, he suddenly taps my shoulder, and I just tensed up and I looked at him in alarm because I really don't like being touched by people due to some childhood trauma. But this guy just doesn't seem to notice my reaction to him, and he just smiled at me. "Hey, I noticed that you don't have a meal. Aren't you hungry? You know what? You can have my meal," he said, and I was just looking at him before saying, "No, it's okay," and smiled uncomfortably. But he insisted, and he even got me to lower my table and forcing me to accept his meal. Then he ordered another meal for himself and started telling me that he can't eat alone after seeing me. He said he felt sorry for me and that it was in his nature to help people. And then he just watched me eating his meal with a big grin on his face. He didn't even touch his meal after I was done. Now, if the meal wasn't prepared by the airline and it was still sealed, I would definitely think that he put something in my meal. But then I thought, maybe I was just being paranoid. Maybe he was just really trying to be helpful, even though I felt extremely uncomfortable, and he was being a little forceful. He even moved to the middle seat to be closer to me. He then asked me what my name was, and he told me that his name was Sam and that he worked somewhere in the peninsula. I just nodded, and then he asked me where I was from and why I was going there. I gave him a short but honest answer just to be polite, and when I told him that I was a student at one of the local universities there, he then asked me how I was going to get to my university at this hour. I stupidly said, "Oh, I'm just going to spend the night at the airport. I'm used to it." "What? No, that's too dangerous for a girl as pretty as you," he said before continuing. "You know what? My brother has a place not far from the airport. Why don't you stay with me?" "Oh, don't worry. My sister-in-law is there. You wouldn't be alone. Don't worry. I'm a good person," he said, still with that big grin on his face. I immediately become afraid, and I quickly said no while shaking my head. "Oh, there will be a lot of people at the airport. I'm used to it," I said, but he ignored me and began to chatter happily, not caring whether I answered him or not. At one point, he even asked me if I was single and asked for my phone number, and I just gave it to him, but I was planning to block his number if he tried to contact me or something. He even made a few comments about my looks and how he found me so cute that I looked so lost that he just had to say something to me. At this point, I began thinking about my option. For some reason, I didn't think about approaching one of the air hostesses for help because, technically, he hadn't done anything wrong to me. But I felt scared anyhow. I decided that I would get out as fast as I can as soon as we landed and then ditch this guy. Just to be safe, I don't know, maybe I'm just being an idiot, but I have had several encounters with creepy people before, but it was so bad that my few friends and cousins called me the weirdo magnet. So, no, I'm not taking any chances. After all, I was a first-year student and had just started university, and I didn't have anyone that I can really call my friends yet. So, yeah, I'm very much on my own. So back to the story. The plane landed and I try to get out as fast as I can, but I have a hand carry luggage and it was slowing me down. Sam was standing behind me the whole time, and once we get on the ground, he actually held my hand as if it was the most natural thing to do. I froze. I was really scared, and I honestly didn't know what to do. I absolutely hated it when people touch me. My family never hugged me, and my very few friends knew that I hated being touched unless I tell them that it's okay to touch me. And this stranger just holds my hand without saying anything. I know that I should do something, maybe scream for help or something, but I just stood there and I froze like an idiot that I am, and I just followed the stranger. Then we walked past the toilet, and I suddenly got an idea. I told Sam that I needed to go to the toilet. At first he said no, that there's no time because his brother is here and we needed to hurry up. But I insisted on going and I said that I really have to pee, and I wasn't lying either. So he sighed and said okay. I got hopeful. Maybe I can escape from this guy. So I started to drag my stupid luggage to the toilet, but this guy stopped me and told me that he can look after my luggage for me. I said no thanks, but he just grabbed my luggage from my hand and told me to hurry up. So I walked to the toilet and stayed there for a bit, panicking. I thought about ditching my luggage and just trying to escape without it. But then I remembered that my laptop was inside that luggage, and it has all the important documents that I needed for my study. I tried to call somebody, but my phone was dead. I started to tear up a bit, and I decided to just ditch my stupid luggage and run away somehow. But I must have taken too much time in the toilet because then I heard someone enter it and call my name. Yeah, it was Sam, and my heart dropped. I slowly got out from the toilet, fully convinced that it was it for me. I'm doomed. Now, you would think that I could ask for someone's help or just approach one of the staff for help. I know that I should. But as soon as he touched me, my skin crawled and I just got really scared again. And since it was already very late and we were really the last flight to arrive that night, there were very few staff around, and those that were working were engaged in something else or were surrounded by other passengers, probably asking for help about accommodation for the night or something. I just watched them helplessly, hoping someone might notice my distress, but everyone just ignored me. While walking towards his brother's car, he told me to tell his brother that I am his girlfriend and just to stay quiet and he'll do all the talking. Then I thought, maybe I could ask his brother for help and just send me to my university instead of going to wherever this guy is planning to take me. But then I started thinking that what if his brother doesn't believe me? I mean, between family and a stranger, who would you believe, right? Plus, maybe I am just being stupid, and Sam was really helping me, even though he was forceful and wouldn't let go of me. Maybe he was just overly nice. Seeing no other choice, I sadly got into the car with him. Now, I'm not good with cars, but I remember the car I got into with these strangers is a black double cabin Hilux, but I didn't see the plate number. So we drove for about an hour, and all the time I was scared, and this guy wouldn't let my hand go. I noticed the brother kept looking at me through the mirror, and I was even more scared and uncomfortable. Then they brought me to his condo. I was hoping that there was really a sister-in-law and that all of this was just a huge stupid misunderstanding. But then his brother told me that his wife is not home and that she was visiting some family member and will only be back tomorrow. I really don't know what to think about anymore. So, Sam told me that I can stay in his room and then tomorrow morning he would take me back to my university. I didn't really want to go in his room, but I don't really want to stay in the living room with the two men that I don't know. He showed me his room, and then he handed me my luggage bag, and I just locked the door. So I just sat in his bed looking at the door, and my heart was pounding like mad. For a while, nothing happened. Then I heard a knock on the door. I tried to be quiet because maybe whoever it was will leave me alone, thinking that I had gone to sleep. "It's Sam. Are you awake?" he said in a quiet voice. "I just needed to talk to you for a bit." When I didn't say anything, I heard the doorknob being turned, but I locked it so he can't get in. Then it was quiet again for a bit, until I heard the jingle of a key, and my heart dropped when I realized that he had a key and he was trying to get inside. I hurriedly told him to wait, and I opened the door just a bit. Sam was there smiling at me again. "Oh, I thought you were sleeping. Why did you lock the door?" he asked. "What do you want? I'm tired and I just really want to rest," I told him, and I tried to shut the door, but he pushed the door and prevented me from shutting the door properly. "Sam, please, just leave me alone for now. I'm really tired," I told him, but he wouldn't budge. "Hey, what's wrong? I'm really a good person. You have nothing to fear from me. You can trust me," he said. At this point, I got another idea. I said, "Oh yeah? Then prove it. Give me your IC." "That's a Malaysian identification card, if you didn't know," I said, and to my surprise, he said okay, and he really did give me his IC. "See, I'm not lying to you," he told me. So yeah, I got his card and I saw that his name was really Sam, but that doesn't really mean anything. The card seems legit, but he is still a stranger to me. Long story short, he got inside the room and locked the door behind him. So it was just him and me, trapped inside the room, and he tried to have a conversation with me and tried to get me to sit down with him on the bed, but as soon as he tried to get close to me, I just stood up and tried to get to the door, in which point he proceeded to grab my hand, and I tried to get away from him, and I finally screamed and I told him to go away. I don't remember much about what happened next, but the next thing I know is that I heard his brother's voice calling for us and asking what happened, and he was banging on the door. Now I was crying hysterically, and I was struggling to open the door while Sam just sat on his bed looking at me, seemingly stunned, as if he didn't do anything wrong. I finally managed to get the door open, and at this point I was sobbing, and I told his brother that I wanted to leave now and that I didn't want to be there anymore. Somehow, I convinced his brother to just drive me to my university. Of course, the gate was locked, and the security guard there told me that I had to walk to my dorm because he can't let any car inside after midnight. And I just said that it was fine, and I walked the rest of the way, but I didn't care. I didn't want his brother to find out where I stayed for fear that they might come back and search for me. I was exhausted, and I remember telling my friends back home about what happened the next day after getting some much-needed rest, and they dismissed it and saying that I was just being dramatic and it was actually romantic. Yeah, they actually thought that it was romantic and that I missed a good opportunity to find a boyfriend. And I was like, what the heck? Which part was romantic? The part where he practically dragged me to come with him even though I repeatedly said no, or maybe the part where he locked me in his room with him. What the hell? Oh, and I still had his IC, but I kind of forgot that I had it with me until I arrived at my room, and I just kind of lost it. I cried silently and I realized that I was still holding his damn IC, and I cried even harder. And because of that, I unfortunately woke up my roommates. I didn't know them that much, but they were kind and helped me, and I told them bits and pieces of what happened to me. But honestly, I just wanted to sleep and forget anything that ever happened. For a week, I lived in terror. I refused to go out of the dorm in fear that Sam and his brother might come back. Sam did text me and call me a few times, asking about his IC, and asked for me to hang out with him and his brother again, as if nothing happened and that everything was just fine. And then he told me that he went to my university looking for me, and I freaked out. I asked my roommates to drop his card with the security guard and told Sam to just pick it up there, and he never came. I blocked his number after that, and I ended up dropping out of the university a few weeks later, but for a different reason, unrelated to this story. I then moved back with my family in East Malaysia. Now, I don't know if I'm actually being overly dramatic about what happened that night, and I don't really care if anyone believed me, but it felt good to finally let this off my chest. And I don't really know what would have happened that night if I didn't scream and convinced his brother to send me back to my university. But Sam, the supposedly good guy, let's never meet again. This all happened very recently. I'm a young woman who works late nights at a bar in a city, but I live in a rural area outside of town. It was a very slow night, so we closed early, and one of the bouncers walked me to my car. I didn't particularly notice anyone following me while I was on the main roads, just a normal sprinkling of cars. I first noticed them when they turned onto one of the super small roads that leads toward the area where I live. It was strange because people rarely pull off onto that road at the same time as me, as it isn't very populated. But as soon as we were on the winding and unlit road, they began to behave strangely. They would flash their bright lights at me, then they would ride my ass until they were practically scraping my bumper. And then, they would suddenly pull really far back. I tried speeding up and slowing down, but that didn't seem to matter. When we came to the first intersection, they turned on their signal to go right. But when I went straight, I watched them in my mirror turn the nose of their car to the right, pause for a few seconds, and then follow me straight. This continued for a while, and at the next intersection, I signaled left and I waited until they did too. But then I quickly turned right, and of course, they followed. I then called the cops and told them that I was headed towards a gas station that I knew to be open, and was the only place remotely nearby that might have people at it, since almost nothing is 24 hours right now. They said that they'd dispatch police to meet me there, and I just tried to focus on driving slowly so that I didn't beat them there. When I got to the gas station, I pulled into the little turn lane, which made the car pause, and then quickly step on the gas and squeal around the corner. I only really had time to glimpse the general look of the car and the driver's face. They were alone, and they were very strange looking. They were incredibly pale, like albino pale, with equally pale hair. They were completely androgynous, at least from what I could see, and they stared at me for a second before bolting away. The police took like 20 minutes to arrive after that, so I just sat in front of the gas station and watched the road for the cars with my doors locked. And then the police said that there wasn't anything that they could do. My original assumption was that it was a patron from work, but we had so few customers that I feel like I would have recognized them. I don't even know why they would have followed me the full hour, only to begin making themselves really obvious. So if anyone has any words of advice, that would be greatly appreciated. Okay, so for starters, this happened in July of this year and it still freaks me out. I am currently 24 and 23 when it happened, and it was a hot afternoon and I was going home from my boyfriend's house, who lives about a 15 to 20 minute walk from my home. Since it was a scorching heat, I was wearing bike shorts and an oversized tee and sneakers. And as I was getting about 10 minutes away from my home, I put my headphones on and I decided not to rush, as I didn't want to get there just yet because I was enjoying the fresh air. As I'm going to cross the street, a man in a truck, who was also across the street, began catcalling me, and I just ignored him. And I just waited for the light to change. But as I waited, he began getting increasingly more aggressive and overall just wouldn't shut up. The light changes and I make my way across, but he then proceeds to honk his horn as I'm walking by, and then he says, "Hey, I'm talking to you. Why don't you come with me for the night and I'll treat you real good?" And I immediately told him to leave me alone, and I continued on my way. But as I am walking, he begins following me in his car and keeps trying to get me to go with him. I call my boyfriend and I tell him the situation, and he FaceTimes me to see the car and the person following me. He then tells me to go in a store and stay there. I do as he says, but not even 2 minutes after I walk in, the man walks in, and he was looking for me. He spots me and I immediately go to the person behind the counter and then tell her the situation, and she offers to let me in the back and call the police. I told her yes, and then I waited. He walked up and asked the lady if she had seen someone with my description, and she immediately says no, and if he's not going to buy anything, just to please leave as she had customers. He begins huffing and puffing that he knows that she saw me, and once again she says to leave, and that if he doesn't, she will call the police. Well, that got him, and so he left. About 5 minutes later, my boyfriend arrives and tells me that he's going to take me back to his, as he feels that it's safer. I don't really argue, and then we leave the store. As we walk out, the man is there, and then he looks at us and said, "Oh, so you're just a tease with a boyfriend. Huh, typical." And my boyfriend immediately goes into protective mode and gets in his face and tells him, "If I ever see you again, if you even breathe in her direction again, you'll regret it." And he then proceeds to punch the man in the groin and walks me back to his house. Sometimes I really hate being a woman. I'm an American currently living in Japan for a few months while my husband works here. I was in a shoe store at a mall all by myself, and this guy came up to me and asked how I was doing. By the tone, I could tell his intentions were gross, so I ignored, and I was going to pretend that I didn't speak English. He persisted and kept asking and asked what my name was. I ended up telling him that I was fine and told him my name, which I regret. Just my first name though, and he didn't tell me his. He asked if I was alone. Ew, I knew it was probably bad news when he asked that. I said no, that I'm with my husband. He looked around and said, "I don't see anyone. Are you lying to me?" Then I said, "No, he's around." Genuinely scared at this point, but I didn't want to make it obvious. I walked to the other side of the store and I pretended to look at shoes. I saw him still on the other side of the store staring at me. He wasn't even trying to make it subtle. He was just standing with his hands in his pockets, looking right at me. And then I noticed, when I move, he would move and never stop looking at me. So I stood near a group of girls in the store and looked back, and he had turned around and I booked it out of the store. I was on the 5th floor and I ran down the escalator to the 3rd one, and I stopped myself thinking that maybe I should act less panic. Maybe I should act like I'm not bothered. And then after a little while, I saw him on the same floor looking right at me and walking right at me again. That's when I went into flight mode and I got the hell out of the mall, doing full 360s just to make sure that he wasn't around. And I didn't see him again. I know when you're being followed that you're not supposed to go straight home, so I went to another mall and I stayed there for about an hour. The whole time being super aware of my surroundings, and I didn't see him after leaving the first mall. I called my husband to let him know, and I described the guy to him. Apparently, it's a thing over here that this type of guy that was following me usually tries to kind of recruit girls to bring back to clubs to attract guys, and prostitution ties in with it. Apologies if I sound naive, because I am. I don't really know anything about this stuff. I am so grateful that nothing actually happened, but I am still freaked out and by the thought of what could have happened. I am confident that he didn't follow me out of the first mall, but I am still really scared and I am not planning on going out by myself anytime soon. I feel like I should clear up this detail for context. It was a Nigerian man that was following me, and I guess it's a thing over here that a lot of Nigerian men try to get girls for some of the things that I said above. Again, I apologize for being naive. I'm totally new to this type of thing. I did end up seeing him a few more times on the street that we lived on. There were a lot of bars/clubs on that street. A Nigerian one right next to our building. I don't think he ever recognized me, but we ended up moving apartments because I didn't feel safe there. Luckily, I never saw him after that again. A few years ago, when I, a female, was about 19, I got a job at a hot dog shop. With a phallic pun for a name, in a somewhat shady area, the shop was pretty well known and had some fantastically dark local lore. Rumors that the hot dogs were made out of horse meat and that the whole operation was a front for something less savory, or that we had been closed by the health inspector and reopened illegally circulated. But people kept coming back for our delicious hot dogs. I soon discovered that none of that was even remotely true, but it was fun to gossip. And we'd often give customers ambiguous answers to fuel their wide-eyed morbid curiosities. I got used to the quirky characters that would come by pretty quickly. Some older gentlemen rumored to be involved with organized crime. The occasional nightclub owner, tourists, and many homeless and mentally ill people who we would provide food for too. The community was diverse and sometimes dangerous, but people looked after each other. One shift in the early hours of the morning, I was working the register when a man comes in. He has long dark hair and thick stubble covering over the lower half of his face. The shop is busy and he orders, steps to the side, and keeps chatting to me while other people order. I was used to this. In an area with a lot of nightlife, you get pretty comfortable with drunk ramblings, people hitting on you through slurred speech, and I felt okay as long as I was on the other side of the counter. About halfway through, after telling me his thoughts about all the other men in the shop being posers, but before he started telling me how beautiful I was, the man tells me that he is a chef at a nearby restaurant. Like I said, people look after each other here, so I was reassured, but I gave him a fake name just to be safe. I started seeing him often. It wasn't uncommon to have regulars, some even on the first name basis, but when my co-workers told me that he had come looking for me, asking after me when I wasn't there, I started to feel a little uneasy. Every time that I saw him, he seemed to be more intoxicated than the last. He would walk in and say, "Hey, beautiful," or "Hi, pretty girl," so casually as though it was really my name. It made me feel sick to my stomach every single time. And one night at 2 a.m., I finished my shift, only to step out onto the sidewalk and see him there, and on the other side of the road, waving at me coyly. I tried not to think about how long he might have been there, watching me through the shop's large neon sign cluttered windows, and my manager walked me to my car that night. Not too long after that, it was a Saturday night, and the shop was pumping. Anyone who has work hospitality knows exactly what I'm talking about. There was a 40-minute wait for French fries. The tiny shop floor was crowded with people who had rolled out of any one of the nearby nightclubs, drug-addled and starving. It was the 3 a.m. rush. A big, bulky man in his mid to late 20s started getting in my face. He had ordered fries and have been waiting for 30 minutes. I kept apologizing, but that just made him more mad. I was desperately trying to plan an escape from my position against the back wall and behind the counter to the front door where I could get a club bouncer's attention and have them come over and sort this guy out. But there was no hope. The store was too crowded. But that's when I hear a sloppy but familiar voice saying, "Leave her alone." My stalker emerges from the crowd. A mere 5'5", he fronts up against the massive man and they start fighting. Luckily, the commotion did catch the eye of a bouncer who ran in and swiftly de-escalated the situation. Shortly after that, I got a more stable job offer elsewhere, and then I moved on. But to my hot dog shop stalker, thanks, but no thanks. I, a 25-year-old female, have recently moved to a new city, which is something a lot of people from my home city are doing. Thus, there is a specific group on Telegram for people from my home city to find some housemates or rental buddies. Ben reached out to me after I posted my expectations in the group, saying that he is interested. He said he wanted to meet up first. I figured that it's a good idea to meet a few times before going house hunting together, so we set up a lunch meeting. During lunch, the only thing that annoyed me is him saying that he hoped that I can lower my budget. I felt like this was a waste of my time, as clearly our expectations weren't compatible. However, things went weird after our lunch. When walking towards the subway station, he kept tapping on my shoulder occasionally. Although I felt the frequency was weird, I convinced myself that maybe that's just how he is in general. Based on our previous chit-chat, I learned where Ben lives, and he is supposed to get off at Station A and then switch to another line, while I would get off at Station B, which is 2 stops after Station A, and then I switch lines to another one. Because I'm quite new to the city, I didn't realize that he had not gotten off at Station A until I had to get off myself. He followed me off and then switched lines with me while trying to start different conversations. One stop before the actual station that I live nearby, I told Ben that I had to get off of here to do some shoppings and then ready to say my goodbye. But Ben followed me off again and went to the grocery store with me. I kept telling him that he could leave and that I was fine shopping by myself, but he insisted to stay. Every time that I turned around in the grocery store, Ben was standing really close to me, like if he had boobs, they would be in my face. I felt super uncomfortable, and I just grabbed 2 4-liter bottled waters and then went to the cashier. And when I was paying, Ben grabbed my water and offered to take those to the Airbnb that I was staying. I tried to decline politely, but he wouldn't hand me back my water, and I didn't want to have my buddy touch with him, so I didn't try to take the water back with force. And I just kinda let him take those water to my Airbnb. My bad, I know. Ben made his way into the common area of my Airbnb. It was a shared house type, and I didn't even invite him in. Then he kept trying to start more and more conversations with me. At several points, it was completely silent, but he still wouldn't leave. And in the end, after hours, I had to ask him to leave. Days afterwards, he still keeps texting me weird messages, which I didn't reply at all. And after that, I just blocked him, and I moved out of the Airbnb as I didn't want to trigger him when he still knew where I lived. When I was around 15 years old, I was very active in many Facebook art groups, and I got to meet many people online who were often my age and ended up making a lot of friends. They were never from my city though, not even in my own country. So when I finally found someone from my city, I kinda got excited. This dude told me that he was my age. Well, spoilers, he wasn't. He was at least 18 at that moment. And like the dumb kid that I was, I believed him. We talked for 2 months, and I think that he seemed chill. At least, until he started to ask for personal info and pictures of me. And let me tell you, I may be an idiot, but I'm not stupid, and I never sent anything. But my Facebook profile didn't have any, but sadly, my mom did have some pics of me, and I tend to stand out because I am very tall and have very recognizable features. Before continuing, I want to address the title of this story. Why Ronald McDonald? Well, he was very, very obsessed with Ronald McDonald. He had pictures of him everywhere and would share mostly old photos of the suit. But at that time, I thought it was just a joke or a weird aesthetic. And since I've always loved creepy photos, I didn't think much of it. At least until he started to show his clear devotion to the clown. He would say things like Donald was his hero and he wanted to meet him, something that wasn't probable since we don't have a McDonald's in my country. In his mission to get to know me, he asked if I was interested in someone and I said no, then proceeded to ask me if I wanted to be his girlfriend. I, of course, said no. He kept insisting, so I lied and said that I wasn't interested in anyone because I already had a girlfriend. I'm bi, and I was very open about it online at that time. Well, he quickly switched from be my GF to you're a sinner. And that's when I knew that this dude was religious and homophobic as hell. He even asked me if my dad or any man had done something to me for me to like girls more. And that's where I decided to block him everywhere that I could. He tried to contact me from different accounts, but the way he writes is very distinct, so I blocked them too. He would be everywhere. I would join a group for artists only, and he would pop out of nowhere. If I left the group, he would leave too. I would go to conventions with my cousin and he would be there. I knew how he looked because he did send me pictures of him. I tried to pass it as a weird coincidence, but he didn't even like anime or anything about the conventions, so it was really weird. This went for a good couple of years, and I somehow managed to avoid a physical encounter every time. I'm guessing he could keep track on me because I was still very active in my city's art community. I never post about personal life or my face, but the times I did say something like, "I'm going to this place to help," and then he would be there. Fast forward some years, and I'm attending to an art-related class. One weird dude is my classmate, and I say he's weird because he would ship me with my friend who was also in the class. He would ask very NSFW questions to us like if we were a couple, so I just try to keep distance. One day, the McDonald guy comes to the building. I obviously fast walk to the other side of the building, but apparently, he was looking for the other dude, and of course, they were friends. It seemed that the weird dude would talk about me and my friend with the Donald guy, who clearly knew who I was and was still trying to get to me. The classes always ended quite late, and I had to wait for my mom to pick me up. I'm very calm and quite strong, so I didn't fear being robbed because I had already been in that situation and I know how to deal with it. But the knowledge of the Donald guy knowing where I was 3 days of the week late at night really gave me chills. I know I don't describe him like a dangerous guy, but he has been keeping an eye on me since 2016. I was still a kid, and I swear to Sky Daddy that I saw him walking on the street one night that my mom was late. And then I ran into a sandwich store that was in the opposite direction because it looked like he was approaching me. I finished the classes and I worked there for a little project, no more than a few days, but guess what? He was there. He didn't enter the building, but I could see him walking outside. Thankfully, those days my boss let me stay inside until my mom arrived, so I felt more calm. I see him around the internet from time to time, and I make sure to block him. Well, at least, I'm sure he doesn't know where I live, because I moved recently, so that's a little comforting. So yeah, there's a weird Christian dude obsessed with Ronald McDonald who has been keeping an eye on me for at least 5 years now. I currently go to a large university in Philadelphia, and my school isn't in the greatest part of the city. I'm a senior now, and I've sort of learned to just keep my head down, and most of the people in the area will leave me alone. The one exception that I've had to this was my freshman year. My roommate freshman year was an absolute mad woman, stealing my stuff, threatening to physically assault me, and spreading rumors about me. I generally tried to stay out of my room for the most part to just avoid any interaction with her until I was able to get a new roommate the next semester. As a result, I spent a lot of my time at the library or at other friends' places. A few weeks into my first semester, I think it was around early October, I was hanging out at a friend's place. He lived on the other side of the campus, probably a 15-minute walk from my dorm room, but my path from my room to his dorm never left campus. I had been warned prior to moving into my dorm room that campus was the safest place for students because the locals generally stayed off campus unless they were grabbing food from a food truck. Keeping that in mind, I really didn't mind walking back from my friend's dorm room late at night since the path was well lit, and the only people I saw there were other students. Regardless, it was getting late and it was a weeknight, so I told my friend that I was going to head out. He offered to walk me home, but I declined, saying that I would be fine, which was my first mistake. The walk back was perfectly fine up until I got to a block that my dorm building was on. For context, there was another empty dorm building on the block that I lived on. It was scheduled to be torn down later that year because there was black mold everywhere inside. But at that time, it was still standing and there was absolutely no lights outside of it. There was a courtyard behind the building which I used as a shortcut, which was my second mistake. As I entered the courtyard, I used my phone as a flashlight to kind of guide my way through the space. And as I was nearing the other end of it, I heard someone call out, "Miss!" Obviously, my first thought was, nope, and I just kept walking pretending that I didn't hear anything, and I picked up my pace. But the voice called again and said, "Wait, miss!" At this point, I was nearly out of the courtyard and there was some light coming from the windows of my dorm building, so I could kind of see what was going on without completely relying on my flashlight. I turned around to see who had been calling out to me, which was my third mistake, and I was met with a man. He looked so ordinary, except for his oddly wide smile and the fact that he was carrying a rather heavy-looking trash bag. "Hey, miss, I have something for you." I think I'm okay. I need to be getting home," I said. "No, I think you need to see this. Let me show you." He opened the trash bag and reached his hand in. I didn't know what to expect, so I bolted. I ran further from the courtyard and toward the ramp that led up to my building, thinking that I could outrun him, but I was sorely mistaken. Despite the fact that there was about 10 to 15 feet between us, as soon as I turned, his hand was around my wrist. "Miss, I have something for you. I really think you need it." Feeling trapped and unsure what to do, I sighed, defeated. I hoped to God that someone would look out their window and see what was going on, or someone else would be walking back to the building at that late hour and then see us. I wanted to scream, but I was scared that if I drew attention to us, that he would do something that would make me really regret trying to get help. Again, not the greatest part of the city. He smiled at me, like he knew that I wasn't going to try and call out and then let go of my wrist. I didn't realize how tightly he was gripping me until he released it. He took a step back from me and reached back into the trash bag again. My heart was pounding and I wasn't sure what to expect, but it definitely wasn't what he pulled out of the bag. It was a clock, an old digital alarm clock. That thing had to be at least 20 years old, and it was encrusted with dirt, like he literally pulled it out of a junkyard. I was stunned at the sight of the yellow and orange plastic, and after I realized that he was actually trying to give me the clock, I thought it might have been a bomb. "Here, this is just for you." "Oh, I really don't need one. I have a clock up in my room," and I said, gesturing toward the massive building behind me. "This one's different." "What the hell? What's that supposed to mean?" Miss, see, this one has a radio. Pretty unique, don't you think? I bet yours doesn't have a radio function." He smiled. "I mean, mine didn't, but don't most alarm clocks have radios built into them?" I took a step back from him, but as I stepped back, he stepped closer, mirroring my movement. He reached out, presenting the clock to me. I took another step back, and he took another one forward. I knew my back was literally going to be against the wall of the dorm building if I took another 2 steps back, and I wasn't sure where to go. I felt like I had no choice but to go against everything my body was telling me not to do and just accept the clock. I reached out and noticed that where he had grabbed my arm, it was already bruising. With my hand now outstretched, he placed the clock in my hand. I felt so dirty having it in my hand. I don't know how to describe it, but I instantly felt that I just finished rolling around in the dirt. My arm felt like it was throbbing, and the clock was so heavy. It felt like it was getting heavier with every passing second. I knew it just felt like that because I was freaking out, but it didn't make the experience any less terrifying. I didn't know what to do, and the guy was still smiling at me, so I blurted out, "Oh, thanks," and I spun around gripping the clock. I took a step away from him toward the ramp leading up to my building, and he took a step back. I decided that this was my chance to bolt for the door. I spun around on my heels and took another few steps before hearing, "You're so beautiful. I love you," called out behind me. I turned back and the man was out of sight. I screamed. I didn't know what I got myself into, but I didn't want to be any part of it anymore. So I sprinted toward the door to the building, dumping the clock in the trash can outside on the way. And I still thought that there was a decent chance that it was a bomb, and if it was going to explode, I wanted to do so in a contained space. Nothing came of the man or the clock other than the bruise on my arm, and it healed completely within a few days. And soon after that, I had sort of forgotten about the incident. I think I just repressed the memories, and I didn't want to unpack what I went through. I still tried to not think about it, and the only reason I'm writing this now is because of my current, not crazy roommate had brought it up a few days ago, and the floodgates of my brain opened, and I felt like I needed to share what happened.
Hello everyone, it's your creepy sister here. Thank you so much for watching the video. I really appreciate each and every one of you. But I would also like to thank my amazing patrons, my top tippers, and my dearest channel members. Thank you very, very much. I really appreciate it with all of my heart. If you want to support the channel further, you could also choose to become a patron, a tipper, or a channel member. But remember, it's appreciated, but never a requirement. I would also like to announce that we have merch now. The link is in the description of the video, along with all my other social media links, like my Discord server, Twitter, Instagram, and others. You can connect with me and send your stories there. And don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't yet, and comments are highly appreciated. And remember, your fear feeds me.